Before there were 50 stars on a flag, before there was a flag at all, there was a land, ancient, vast, and alive. A continent shaped over millions of years, its mountains older than memory, its rivers carving stories into the earth long before any human eye bore witness. This is the story of that land, of the people who first walked it, of those who came from across the ocean seeking something new, of wars fought and freedoms won and promises broken and dreams reborn. This is the story of America, not just as a nation, but as an idea, an experiment. It is a story of glory and shadow, of courage and cruelty, of hope that never quite dies. This is the United States of America. Long before Columbus, before the Mayflower, before any European ship dipped its bow into the Atlantic, this land was full, gloriously, magnificently full of life. Archaeologists believe the first humans arrived in North America somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago. They came across the Bering Land Bridge, a stretch of land connecting Siberia to Alaska, following herds of mammoth and bison into an unknown world. Over thousands of years, their descendants spread across the continent. In the frozen north, the Inuit hunted beneath sheets of ice. In the southwest, the ancient Puebloans built multi-story stone cities into cliff faces, engineering marvels that still stand today. In the Mississippi Valley, the Cahokia civilization built a city larger than London in 1100 CE. By the time Europeans arrived, an estimated 50 to 100 million people lived in the Americas, over 500 distinct nations in North America alone, each with its own language, its own philosophy of what it meant to be human. This was not an empty land, it was a world. October 12, 1492. A sailor aboard the Pinta spots a sliver of land in the moonlight and shouts into the dark. Christopher Columbus, believing he has reached the East Indies, steps ashore onto an island in the Caribbean. He calls the people he meets Indians, and the mistake will last forever. Within decades, the Spanish Empire explodes across the Americas. It wasn't just swords and guns that destroyed the great civilizations, it was disease. The indigenous peoples had no immunity to European illnesses, smallpox, measles, influenza. Some historians estimate that within a century of contact, up to 90% of the indigenous population had died. It was the largest demographic catastrophe in human history. In 1585, England sent its first colony to Roanoke Island. When supply ships returned in 1590, every colonist had vanished. The only clue? The word Croatan carved into a wooden post. The mystery of the lost colony has never been solved. 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English settlement. 104 men and boys dropped into a swamp on the James River with almost no survival skills and enormous ambitions. The first years were catastrophic: disease, starvation, conflict. During the starving time of 1609 to 1610, only 60 of 500 colonists survived. Jamestown survived anyway and discovered tobacco. Virginia's economy exploded, and to work the fields, colonists turned to something dark. In 1619, a ship arrived with 20 and odd Africans. This was the beginning of African slavery in English America, a wound that would not be healed for 246 years. In 1585, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts in brutal winter. Nearly half died. But with help from the Wampanoag Nation, they survived and held the first Thanksgiving. Over the next century, 13 distinct colonies formed, 3 very different Americas learning to coexist. The trouble began, as it so often does, with taxes. After winning the French and Indian War in 1763, Britain was broke and decided the American colonies should help pay. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry. On March 5, 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists, the Boston Massacre. On December 16, 1773, colonists dumped 342 chests of British tea into Boston Harbor. On April 19, 1775, the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired at Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. On July 4, 1776, Thomas Jefferson's words shook the earth. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Washington's army nearly collapsed at Valley Forge, but with French help they persevered. Yorktown, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The impossible had happened. Victory was one thing, governing was another entirely. In the summer of 1787, 55 delegates gathered in Philadelphia in sweltering heat to write a governing document for a republic that had never existed before, the Constitution of the United States. George Washington became the first president. When he voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, he established the most important tradition in American democracy, that power is transferred, not seized. Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the country's size for just $15 million. Lewis and Clark explored it all the way to the Pacific. But expansion came at a brutal price. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced 5 native nations from their homelands. On the Trail of Tears, thousands died marching to Oklahoma in winter. By the 1840s, Americans called this hunger manifest destiny, a beautiful phrase for a brutal reality. The wound at the heart of America could not be ignored forever: slavery. By 1860, 4 million people were enslaved in the American South. Human beings bought and sold, worked to death, denied every right that the Declaration claimed was self-evident. Lincoln's election in 1860 triggered secession. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons fired on Fort Sumter. The Civil War began. It lasted 4 years and killed 620,000 soldiers. Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history, 23,000 casualties. Gettysburg, 51,000 killed, wounded, or missing in 3 days. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 transformed the war's purpose. At Gettysburg, he spoke of government of the people, by the people, for the people. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox on April 9, 1865. 5 days later, Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning. The nation was whole again, but it was shattered. Reconstruction gave freed Black Americans extraordinary opportunity. Black men voted, served in Congress, built schools and businesses, but the Ku Klux Klan used terrorism to suppress Black political power. When Reconstruction ended in 1777, the brief window slammed shut. Jim Crow laws swept in. Meanwhile, the Transcontinental Railroad stitched the continent together in 1869. The buffalo herds, once 30 million strong, were hunted to near extinction. Industrialists like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan built fortunes that dwarfed the national economy. Mark Twain called it the Gilded Age, gleaming outside, corrupt at its core. In the slums of New York and Pittsburgh, millions of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Poland, Russia, and China labored in dangerous conditions for pennies a day. Children worked in coal mines. The gap between the Carnegies and the coal miners was a canyon, but the workers were beginning to organize. Theodore Roosevelt burst into the White House in 1901 like a force of nature, the youngest president in history, furious about corporate power. He became the trust buster, broke up Rockefeller's Standard Oil, created the National Park System, and pushed for food safety laws. It was the progressive era, reform, exposure, and optimism. Muckraker journalists exposed corruption everywhere. Women fought for the right to vote. Workers organized into unions. Then the world exploded. World War I began in Europe in 1914. In 1917, Germany's submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram pushed America into the war. 2 million soldiers poured into France, helping tip a stalemate that had killed millions. The armistice came November 11, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. 17 million dead. The war to end all wars. Except it wasn't. After the horror of war, America wanted to dance. The 1920s roared. Jazz music exploded from New Orleans. Women cut their hair and raised their hemlines. Model T put every family on the road. Prohibition created Al Capone. The stock market soared. Everyone seemed to be getting rich. Then, on October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. By 1932, 25% of Americans were unemployed. Banks collapsed. In the Dust Bowl, black blizzards buried entire towns. Hundreds of thousands of Okies drove to California, only to find exploitation waiting. Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932. Wheelchair-bound by polio, radiant with optimism, he told a frightened nation, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." His New Deal, the Civilian Conservation Corps, Social Security, the SEC, rebuilt hope. It didn't end the Depression, but it saved American democracy. December 7, 1941, a Sunday morning in Hawaii. 353 Japanese aircraft appeared over Pearl Harbor. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. 2,403 Americans killed. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. America was in it now. Factories converted from cars to tanks overnight. Women, Rosie the Riveter, entered the workforce by millions. 16 million Americans served in uniform. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in history, stormed the beaches of Normandy. Slaughter and heroism in equal measure. They took the beaches. Europe's liberation had begun. In the Pacific, island by island, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, American forces clawed toward Japan. Then came the bomb. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. 80,000 dead instantly. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Japan surrendered August 15th. World War II was over. The world had used a weapon that could end civilization. Nothing would ever be the same. America emerged from World War II as the most powerful nation on Earth, but the Soviet Union had its own atomic bomb by 1949. The Cold War began, a decades-long contest of ideology, influence, and nuclear terror. At home, Senator McCarthy's Red Scare ruined careers with reckless accusations of communist infiltration. But another reckoning was coming. In 1954, Brown versus Board of Education declared school segregation unconstitutional. Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat in 1955. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days. In 1963, 250,000 people marched on Washington, and Martin Luther King Jr. declared, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. All men are created equal." The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 ended legal apartheid. And in space, on July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. America had won the space race. The The 1960s and 70s tested America's faith in itself like nothing since the Civil War. Vietnam. By 1968, over 500,000 American soldiers were in Vietnam, and the war was going nowhere. Television brought it into living rooms. Napalm, body bags. The country split. At Kent State University in 1970, National Guardsmen shot and killed 4 student protesters. America turned on itself. The war ended in humiliation. In April 1975, the last Americans evacuated by helicopter from the Saigon embassy. 58,000 Americans dead. South Vietnam fell. If Vietnam broke confidence, Watergate broke trust. Nixon's men broke into the Watergate Hotel. 2 years of tapes, cover-ups, and lies. On August 9, 1974, Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, and boarded a helicopter with a final wave. America was exhausted. The country was ready for someone to tell it, once again, that it was great. Ronald Reagan arrived in 1981 with a sunny smile and an iron conviction that government was the problem, not the solution. His tax cuts and military buildup reinvigorated the economy and forced the Soviet Union into an arms race it couldn't afford. He called the USSR an evil empire and meant it. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Germans tore at it with hammers and bare hands and joy. Country after country threw off communism. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. America had won the Cold War without firing a single nuclear weapon. The 1990s were America's unipolar moment, the most powerful nation in the history of the world, presiding over the birth of the Internet. The World Wide Web opened to the public in 1991. By decade's end, dot-com companies were worth billions. Bill Clinton's America ran budget surpluses. It seemed like smooth sailing. Then came the morning of September 11th, 2001. It was a clear blue Tuesday morning. Then, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Minutes later, the world understood this was no accident. By 10:28 a.m., both towers had collapsed. The Pentagon was struck. A 4th plane crashed in Pennsylvania. 2,977 people dead. America went to war. In October 2001, forces invaded Afghanistan. In March 2003, based on intelligence claiming Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, weapons never found, America invaded Iraq. Both wars lasted far longer than anyone planned. Afghanistan became America's longest war, 20 years. Iraq destabilized into chaos. At home, the Patriot Act expanded surveillance. The Department of Homeland Security was born. Airports transformed overnight. America's relationship with privacy and civil liberties was permanently changed. The world before 9/11 was gone. A harder, more anxious America had taken its place. In 2008, 2 enormous things happened. The American financial system collapsed. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The stock market lost half its value. The Great Recession cost 8.7 million jobs. It was the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And in November 2008, Americans elected Obama, the first African-American president in the nation's history. Standing before a weeping crowd in Chicago, he said, "If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, tonight is your answer." The Obama years brought the Affordable Care Act, the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011, and a deepening polarization. The Tea Party movement rose. Social media shattered the shared reality of American public life. The middle ground was shrinking. Americans increasingly lived in separate information universes, angrier by the year. 2016 brought the most surprising election in modern history. Donald Trump, real estate developer, television star, never held office, defeated Hillary Clinton, who would have been the first woman president. His victory stunned the world. America's political fault lines cracked wide open. Then, in early 2020, COVID-19 swept the globe. By year-end, over 300,000 Americans had died. Schools closed, businesses shuttered. The country voted in a pandemic. Joe Biden won, but Trump and allies refused to accept the result. On January 6, 2021, supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. For the first time in history, the peaceful transfer of power was violently interrupted. In 2020, the murder of George Floyd was filmed and watched by the world. Black Lives Matter protests erupted in every American city. America reckoned again with race and justice. Then mRNA vaccines, developed at an unprecedented speed, ended the worst of the pandemic. Science saved the day. The question of what America will become next remains wide open. So what is America? It is a land that was ancient long before it was a nation, populated by hundreds of civilizations before Europeans arrived with their flags and diseases, built by enslaved hands and immigrant dreams and the restless hunger of people who believed that somewhere over the next horizon, something better was waiting. It is a country that wrote all men are created equal while keeping human beings as property, that freed the enslaved after 600,000 soldiers died, then spent another century deciding whether freedom was really meant for everyone, that sent men to the moon while women couldn't get a credit card in their own name. It is a nation of staggering contradictions,